Jose Aldo just made a statement after his performance against Rob Font. When it comes to Rob Font, after coming off an incredible performance against the former bantamweight champion Cody Garbrandt, Font put on a spectacular performance highlighting just how high level his jab was. The impressive part was that he didn't just knock Cody out. His path to victory was earned through consistency and skillful dominance, and it said a lot about his ability to stay disciplined against a reckless power puncher. When it came to Jose Aldo's run at the bantamweight title, he had a rough start losing to Marlon Moraes and the merciless Piotr Jan, and there were questions if he could still compete at this stage of his journey in one of the most talent-rich divisions. The King of Rio, Jose Aldo will always have a special place for many of us who were there at the start of his journey. And it's not just his story that resonates with those who have followed him. His abilities are another amazing display of skills that fighters and fans just can't help but appreciate. And with that said, this video will help give you a better glimpse of those skills. When it came down to Font challenging the former featherweight champion, it made many wonder if Aldo could still hang with the top talent in the division after such a long career. But the more fascinating question that came to mind was how any fighter could handle Font's amazing jab, especially after what he had done to Cody Garbrandt. If Aldo was going to face Font, my curiosity was centered on how he would counter Font's most important tool, his jab. A big reason why I tuned into this fight was to study if Aldo could actually manage to shut down Font's jab, and I wanted to know this because it would serve as an important lesson in handling the jabbers. Although countering Font's jab may have been Aldo's main key to victory, but this fight took a surprisingly different turn. Aldo won, but he didn't necessarily win by shutting down Font's best weapon. As the fight progressed, there was a lot that we learned. To be upfront, Aldo's power made a significant difference in the fight. However, there was something to be said about Font's consistency in the tactics that were used. The way that this fight played out was a bit strange, and it does raise some alarming questions moving forward. Stick around and we'll get into all of that as we check out the story of the fight and break down the signature moves and the tactics that were used. It's going to be worth your time if you're looking for critical details of their technical craft to learn from. Also, there were some pretty cool tactics that were used by Piotr Jan that Font also used to find success too, so stay tuned to check out the details later on in the video. Let's get right into it. Jose Aldo has historically had troubles maintaining his stamina going to the championship rounds in recent years, and it's been quite some time since he's been able to maintain such a high pace in the later rounds. Knowing this, it appeared that Font wanted to capitalize on this by constantly putting on the pressure, even if Aldo hit him hard. That never really stopped Font from marching forward. Both of these fighters were pretty incredible when it came down to dictating who wanted to do what. Aldo is a pretty defensively minded fighter, and he often works off his counters more so than approaching offensively compared to Font. Just looking at his fights from the past, for example, when fighting the likes of Frankie Edgar, Chad Mendes, or even Max Holloway, he was always patient in his approach, often waiting and using his footwork and countering to answer the opponent's approach. And it's pretty rare to see Aldo as the one who leads, like in his fight against Marlon Moraes. The upside is that years of fighting defensively have really honed his defensive ability. With Font, his crafty jab gave him a very important tool that allowed him to consistently impose his attacks without getting caught. As a result, he had this kind of rhythm in the fight centered around Font attempting to pressure with his attacks, and Aldo working his defense while waiting patiently to find his shot. From what I studied, they both had really good pattern recognition. Font would carefully gauge Aldo's reactions and then he would work off of them. For example, take a look at when Font would probe his jab out. So here you're going to notice that Font's going to fire his jab, and then he's going to notice that Aldo is dropping his hand to parry. So the next time he approaches again, instead of throwing the jab, he's actually going to throw a lead hook to come around that parry, and then he catches Aldo off guard. I've observed Font catching and exploiting Aldo's patterns a few times in these kinds of situations. And again, here you see Font reads the parry, and then he's going to go again, but instead he throws a hook to the exposed opening when Aldo tries to parry again. Likewise, Aldo actually did a good job using the same tactic against Font. When Aldo would read Font parrying the jab, he would switch it up and throw his lead hook in order to catch an opening as well. These situations were interesting because you could see a clear difference in their execution. While Font was able to use his tactic a little bit more, Aldo was able to use this more effectively due to the difference in their power. These moments highlight just how good their sense of pattern recognition is, but there was more to this fight beyond their difference in power. Font had a lot of interesting offensive tactics, but before we get into that, let me take a moment to talk about our partnership with Ekster. These are wallets by Ekster. These are high quality wallets, and they're actually a great alternative if you're looking for something better or looking for a gift for an occasion right around the corner. For the classic Parliament, it has this really easy to use card ejection feature for quick card access. The card tracker that you could get for your wallet is very slim and it fits perfectly into the wallet. The card can also be used with your phone for tracking if it ever gets lost. It has a solar panel for convenient charging. The app setup is super easy and the interface is really simple. You just touch the icon to track your phone. The bonus features are that you can also take selfies using the card as a remote or even use the card to track your phone if you lose it. The wallets are really nice and slim, unlike conventional wallets. This is actually my old wallet before I upgraded to the much better Ekster alternative. One of the important features of this wallet is the RFID protection. I can't stress enough this day and age how important it is to protect your personal finances. You can head over to Ekster's website at ekster.com and use my link in the description to get yourself a discount. After studying this fight, I started to notice just how effective and consistent Font actually was in his efforts. Even though he couldn't produce the kind of meaningful shots Aldo was able to do, he was able to do some pretty impressive things that are really worth exploring. Font loves to utilize that jab in so many different ways to find openings and pick the opponent apart using his superior range and understanding of distance. He did this so well against Cody Garbrandt, but against Aldo he couldn't quite get his shots to land effectively. But why? Simply put, Aldo is just a very defensively minded fighter. He will lead in occasions, but it's pretty common to see him work off his defense. It's simply hard to breach his defense due to his experience of honing that defensive style, and to add to that, his technique is also on point. He's got great head movement, and the most impressive thing about it is that he has a really good ability of blocking head kicks in the process of using the head movement. To complement Aldo's defensive technique, he also has really good defensive footwork that Aldo uses is the pivots. In the midst of blocking or slipping punches, Aldo will usually use pivots at some point to avoid danger. Pivot works like opening a door while someone is trying to push right through. In short, when Aldo is defending, he'll often pivot out. This works because it forces the opponent to reset, since it becomes difficult for them to attack or shoot for the legs when Aldo exits at a sharp angle as the opponent tries to rush in on a straight line. The other defensive technique he uses is the L step. Now this is a technique that works by retreating back and stepping the rear foot out laterally. Again, this works conceptually similar to Aldo's pivots in that they both allow you to cut off at an angle away from the opponent. With the L step, this lets you accomplish two things. First, it lets you evade as you retreat the lead leg back, and then secondly, it allows you to abruptly move towards a lateral angle. So there are a few degrees of defensive protection here that lets Aldo avoid all sorts of danger. With Aldo specifically, he likes to complement his L step with a push block style that extends his arm out, and this is usually meant to prevent the opponent from further entry as he steps out. Most of the time, if the opponent is coming to attack, Aldo could pivot to exit off at an angle to his left, but if he can't move in that direction because the opponent is moving there, he'll often use the L step to cut to an angle to his right. He has the flexibility of moving any kind of direction using good defensive footwork. The point that I'm trying to emphasize here is that his defense is pretty well developed throughout so many different facets of his defensive reactions. He can evade in either direction pretty well or depend on his defenses from within the pocket if needed. His head movement is pretty sharp and his footwork makes him very hard to hit, and we can see that in how well he's able to defend against Font's offensive efforts. Aldo would make full use of his pivoting and L-stepping to prevent Font from continuing his attacks. Even though Aldo's defense kept some of Font's attacks at bay, Aldo had to do a little bit more to deter Font from finding his openings. There were a few back and forth struggles that were happening of who could establish what. Aldo wanted to counter Font's jab, and Font wanted to establish his jab to open up his opportunity. For the occasions that Aldo did counter, he was able to find his counters by timing knees or body kicks. Most of the time that Aldo fired these kind of counters, he usually waits for the jab so that he can parry them and return his counter knee or body kick. This counter is pretty cool because it reminded me of Petr Yan not too long ago in his fight against Cory Sandhagen. Since Cory likes to probe with his jab at range, Yan had troubles responding back, so he used those body kicks as a nice way to make up for that difference in range. So even if Yan couldn't quite reach with his punches, his kicks were able to reach with that kind of range. Aldo would occasionally land his cross or his pull cross. With his pull cross specifically, Aldo has to be very on point and precise to land it. Pay attention to Aldo at the green line where his head is. This is going to be the general area where Font is going to attack. He only needs to pull his head back to the yellow line about head distance away, and this is very important to consider. Since Aldo isn't moving his head too far back, he doesn't have to travel that much further in order to connect his counter shot, and this will actually improve the timing of his counter punch because he doesn't have to spend that much time traveling a large distance to come back. In principle, if he was to pull his head back even further, you could see with this red line that he would have to travel that much further back, which would take him a little bit longer. This highlights why it's important to have very precise head movement. I covered this idea of precise head movement before on my channel with Conor McGregor and how he's able to use his kind of counter-punching precision with his pull cross as well. I wanted to highlight this just to show how difficult it was for Aldo to land his counters, despite having very precise head movement. Keep in mind that Aldo did not land his counter very much at all, and it says a lot about Font's defensive execution. Font was able to mitigate Aldo's counters a lot due to his jabbing ability. Font is pretty good at executing his jab in a way that ensures that he doesn't eat counters on his way in, and this is a very important attribute about Font in the first place because having a defensively good jab allows you to lead often, since you know that you can come in often without having to worry about counters as much. So you might be wondering by now, how does Font execute his jabs without eating counters? Well, there's a variety of ways that he accomplishes this, and the short answer is that he does this through technique, rhythm, and footwork. Now those are rather broad concepts, so let's explore these ideas one detail at a time. When it came to Aldo looking to time his pull cross, Font would typically find ways to keep himself outside of the danger zone. One of the ways that he was able to do this was by using a slipping jab. Now as Aldo attempted to time his counter cross, Font caught on and he would slip low, and this allowed him to throw his shot and hide behind his shoulders as Aldo tried to counter. We saw Font go to this quite often to avoid Aldo's counters. There's a few nice attempts from Aldo though where he tried countering this. He would do this sometimes by parrying Font's jab, then he would actually aim his jab down to where Font's head was going to slip to. Aldo would also attempt to throw his counter cross and follow up with a lead hook where Font's head was going to end up. Unfortunately, I didn't see a lot of consistency with this from Aldo's end. One signature move that complemented Font's slipping jab was that he would also mix in slipping in his jabs with his slipping in with a single collar tie to control Aldo's posture. By doing this, this allowed him to take control of Aldo's neck, and what this does is that this actually limits Aldo's defensive options by taking away his head movement. This basically frames on Aldo and it kind of creates this wedge where he has limited head movement. And here you're going to notice that as Font frames here, this jams Aldo from slipping or even returning back to his neutral position. This allowed Font to follow up with an uppercut as soon as Aldo's head was caught. This happens to be a signature move that he used to set up his knockout against Marlon Moraes. By controlling the head, he ends up being able to unload the uppercut to drop Marlon. When it comes to understanding how Font can attack without getting hit, the other part of the story is how well he executes his jab. He's very good at popping that jab in and out and returning back very safely. He did this numerous times against Aldo, popping his shot in and then pulling right out to the point where Aldo's precise head movement could not even catch Font in time in order to counter him. Font's technique is pretty good. He always carries his feet with him when he wants to come forward a jab. When he wants to close that gap to fire his jab, he typically takes a step forward, but he never leans his head past his lead foot when he wants to fire the jab. Now this is very important to consider when you're throwing a jab, because if you overextend past your lead foot, it could cause some problems. You normally don't want to extend your head past your lead foot because this is going to leave you off balance and more prone to eating counters, because it's going to take you a lot longer to recover back to your neutral position, especially with too much weight on one side of your feet. You're going to notice that it's a lot harder to retreat back to your neutral position with too much weight on one side. It's a lot easier to eat counters this way. Like I said, it's very important not to overextend over the lead foot because you will compromise your balance and it's going to be very hard for you to retreat back. Bringing your feet with you allows you to have a more even weight distribution. This lets you retreat almost instantly once you fire your jab. When Font steps into jab, he extends only near his lead foot for a split second. This step forward and the extension with his arm gives him additional range on his jab, but he only stays in this kind of range only to hit the point for a split moment. After throwing the jab, he has a lot of space to pull back to retreat into safety due to good body positioning. Then here you're going to notice that as Font steps into jab, he gets extension from the step, but he also gets the extension of shooting his shoulder forward. And you're going to notice that his shoulder's in line with his lead foot, never really overextending there. And he's in this kind of compromised area in the green angle. And after he fires his jab, just to be in that angle, he's going to pull back very quickly where he avoids the counter. And in here, you're going to see that Fawn's going to get an extension of range by stepping forward, but also extending his shoulders forward towards his lead foot. Now you're going to notice that his spine is bent at an angle past his neutral position, and he's only here in this angle for a split moment. He's going to retreat back into a more safe spot very quickly as Aldo tries to counter. Because Fawn is taking his feet with him, he's not quite overextending with his lead foot, and this allows him to quickly come back out of that danger zone. So he could always pop in that jab very quickly in that danger zone and then come out very quickly due to good foot positioning. This jab works like a probing jab in that Fawn is typically using this to poke the opponent and read their reactions. In a lot of ways, he's using this kind of jab as a way to produce activity by creating reaction on purpose or establishing a rhythm. Sometimes when he probes and retreats only to see that the opponent isn't really reacting to his jab, he'll often work off that reaction again to throw something like a double jab. And since we're on the topic of the double jab, I found that his double jab was pretty effective against Aldo, mainly because Fawn was using this as a way to mostly keep Aldo's guard up and busy up top in order to enable his body shots. Fawn did this a good number of times. So let's continue to see how else Fawn jabs while avoiding danger. Another really useful technique Fawn uses is a jab with a side step and a pivot at the same time. The jab method worked really well in allowing Fawn to fire his jab while minimizing damage. In short, there are at least 3 different defensive layers being used in this kind of execution. The first thing is that Fawn is utilizing a side step. The reason why this adds a defensive layer is because by moving laterally, this makes it very hard for the opponent to land straight shot. Just an example of Tyson Fury, if the opponent was to throw a straight shot, moving laterally will help bypass that threat. A secondary layer of defense is that Fawn adds a pivot with his sidestep. Now this works because the pivot turns your targets away from the opponent like we discussed earlier, and again this adds another defensive layer. So just to pull things together, if Aldo was to throw a straight shot, using a sidestep will help bypass that. So you see he moves laterally with his jab. So here Fawn's going to step, throw that jab, then also notice that the pivot is happening. Now his body's going to open up like a door. Now this is going to help bypass Aldo's counter shot just by a few inches there. Again, this is just an alternate example. You're going to notice that as Gaston comes in, he's going to try to strike at Whitaker's head, but Whitaker is going to throw a check hook, but he's also going to pivot out of the way, and it helps him open up his body away from Gastelum's straight shot, just missing by just a few inches there. You'll notice a lot of times that Aldo did try to counter as Fawn tried to step in the jab, but the pivot and the sidestep did add some kind of additional defensive layer, allowing him to mechanically turn away or to protect himself. And lastly, the third layer of defense is a concept that I showed you earlier, where Fawn will often pull away back out into his neutral stance or even further away after he fires his jab. So when you put all the concepts together, you have Fawn using a sidestep and a pivot, and then popping in and out of range. Now it's very important that you have some kind of built-in defense into your offense. There's always a chance that one of the defensive layers can fail you because you are playing a very dangerous game of inches here, so a lot of things could go wrong. And lastly, another key reason why Fawn can land the jab is because he's unpredictable. So in short, it makes it a little bit harder to predict when he's going to time his shot. He does this constantly by mixing in feints with his jab rhythms. For example, he'll often step and pump the hand to feint an entry before stepping in with the actual jab. So now you have a better understanding of the defensive layers. This gives you an idea of why Fawn can lead so frequently without getting hit as much. So to recap why it's hard to counter Fawn's jab, he's got good built-in defense, and we can see that through the use of his sidestepping and pivoting while hiding behind his shoulders. He also switches his rhythm up like he switched his rhythm using a slipping jab when he's reading that Aldo was countering. And he also switches his rhythm up by using different jab rhythms to confuse the opponent, like he was using with the pumping feint to jab. And also carrying his feet with him during these strikes help defensively to retreat quick if he needed to. I couldn't help but notice that Fawn was using very specific, tricky guard tactic that Piotr Jan often uses. I covered this before on the channel, but I'll cover it again, adding some new information that you might not have known if you've seen my videos before. I'll play a previous section to explain the concept first. When you use your guard and you put your guard up, it tells the opponent that you're going to enter a defensive state. This can actually draw the opponent to come to attack you. You can use this against them by purposely pretending you're going to enter defense, but quickly change your rhythm into an attack as they come forward. For example, watch these instances. You're going to see that Jan will put his guard up for a split second, then he'll quickly burst to land something like a cross or a combo. Now, the shots that tend to hurt you the most tend to be the ones that you don't really see coming. When Jan conveys that he's entering defense, it kind of diminishes the opponent's defensive senses because they're either relaxed or they're moving forward into Jan's power because they're likely to feel like Jan isn't really attacking them. So now that you have an idea of this concept, you'll notice that Font also does this quite often as well, and from what I was able to observe, he actually does this in his other fights too. Now, Font was able to land some pretty clean shots by putting his guard up and quickly changing his rhythm by stepping in with his jab cross. When Font would put that guard up and change his rhythm, Aldo would sometimes let his guard down thinking Font was playing defensive, and this let him land his shots. Recently I actually came across an interesting interview of him explaining the thought process behind this kind of guard. I found it searching for Piotr Jan's name and I came across his channel called the Young and Faded MMA Society. But I'm not entirely sure if they're the ones who translated this, but this is what Jan had to say about the deceptive guard.
А то, что этим моментом я опять же заманиваю соперников, они думают о том, что там он устал, когда встаю в такую защиту.
So in short, Jan uses this as a deceptive method into making his opponent think that he's tired and then it surprises them. And conceptually, it all works the same in the end because you're using this as a way to dull the opponent's defensive awareness. In general, Font's execution of offense was fundamentally sound, that it was good enough that Aldo couldn't quite find significant counterpunches from it. The strange part is that Aldo would produce the most meaningful shots by choosing to actually go on the attack instead of playing off of the defensive. He rarely went on the attack, but the times that he actually went on the attack, he actually was landing at a very high rate, usually landing something very significant. Font was actually pretty susceptible to the leg kicks. In fact, going into the third round, Aldo's corner actually wanted him to time leg kicks while Font was retreating. As the fight played out, Aldo did exactly what his corner wanted him to do and more. When Font would retreat, Aldo would kick the legs. Now this works so well because you usually won't be able to lift the legs or block them properly while you're in mid-transition of moving back or moving forward. It's really a principle of timing where you attack them in the time frame where they're unable to defend the kick. In fact, Aldo was actually able to time the leg kicks perfectly even when Font came forward instead of just retreating. In those instances, you can see this concept play out and how Aldo was able to time in order to attack when Font could not defend the leg kicks. One of the large benefits of Aldo being a defensive fighter is that he often is able to defend things a little bit better because he's usually sitting patiently waiting for the opponent to feed him something in order to react to. This meant that Font couldn't quite find the kind of timing that Aldo was able to find with his kicking attempts. Since Aldo typically sits and waits, this didn't give Font many chances to time kicks because Aldo wasn't trying to retreat or move forward as much, so he didn't have much of those kind of opportunities. So when Font would try to time his leg kicks, Aldo did a really good job of defending them by lifting legs up to check the kick, or turning his leg out to absorb the kicks, or even just lifting the legs to ride the kick. Aldo pulling out his classic leg kicks probably had many fans cheering because this was a rare glimpse of Aldo showing his classic style of striking that he used to rely on before switching to a more boxing-centric approach that you see him use today. It's an interesting topic looking at the evolution of his style, but that's a story for another day. Sadly, this tactical switch to timing leg kicks only happened for the third round before things changed drastically. There's a dramatic shift going to the later rounds. Whenever Aldo had the opportunity to capitalize on having Font on the ground, he took those opportunities and stuck with them the entire time. It appeared that Aldo was mainly trying to secure dominant positions and didn't attempt much offensive submissions or strikes during his control time. At first, Font had some really nice moments of being able to transition into less compromising positions, like right here, he traps Aldo's leg, and what this does is it prevents Aldo from going even deeper into side control where it's harder to go back into guard. So he uses that foot right here to lift Aldo up and he creates elevation. Now this elevation creates space so that he can actually sneak his leg back onto the inside where he could get into the butterfly. So here he lifts Aldo up, manages to go into a butterfly, and then from the butterfly he manages to go back into full guard. Just based off of Aldo's habits, it looked like he started putting more emphasis on controlling Font rather than working some kind of offense, and you'd see him make those kind of adjustments to ensure that he would keep Font in those dominant positions. So like for example, later on in the rounds, you would see that when he was in side control again, he would make a constant effort to prevent Font from being able to move to better positions by always scooting his hips away, going deeper into side control. This kind of theme is the thing that you saw kind of repeat later on in the rounds too. Aldo just seemed more complacent just to maintain control, and he would opt for things like a body triangle just to keep Font from escaping. I'm not entirely sure why Aldo chose to go down this route, and as the commentary speculated, he might have used this chance to rest, and with the evidence that we have, it's entirely possible since Aldo has historically faded into the later rounds. This brings up an alarming issue moving forward. Against the top of the division where it becomes harder to hold fighters down, there's a chance that Aldo may not be able to keep control of the opponent, so it leaves you wondering, what will Aldo's solution be if he can't find a way to maintain control of his opponents, or keep up with the pace in the later rounds? Like Braun Brunson, is his only hope to become Blonde Aldo? Who really knows? Overall, this was a unique fight in that you had one guy who could find a lot of consistency in attempting safe offense, like Font framing into uppercuts, his double jabs, or the countless times that he would probe in and out of his stiff jab. And a lot of those shots didn't really hurt as much, but then you had the other guy who would mainly play on the defensive and not lead as much, but he scored very heavily when he did decide to attack. Font is a really good study to reference for his jab, and for Jose Aldo, it's a very good study to reference for his defensive technique and footwork. I think both of these fighters bring a lot of value to your journey if you're looking for fighters to learn from. Absorb what is useful, discard what is not. Hey everybody, if you made it this far, I just want to say thank you for watching. At the moment, I'm still experimenting with different analysis styles. If this style doesn't work out, I'll probably switch back to a video footage style, but I may have to cover older fights, so it might be a little bit of a challenge. At the moment, I want to commit to getting better at different styles, so I do appreciate all of you being patient with me. Also, if you're new to my work, consider subscribing to my newsletter for any updates on what's going on with my content. You can currently subscribe to check out what I have available to newsletter subs at the moment. And lastly, for those of you who missed the analysis on the Max Holloway versus Yair Rodriguez fight, I have it up on my website if you still want to check it out. It's in video footage format in case you're wondering. Alright, have a good one everybody.